I'm going to let everyone in. Where's the option for that? Admit all. No. Good evening, everyone. We'll be starting at 7 o'clock. If you really want to chat to each other, you can for the next 7.5 minutes. You are all very quiet tonight.
I'm sitting here amazed at this technology.
For beekeepers to be quiet.
Yeah, am I? You hear me now? Yes.
Good evening.
Good evening, everybody.
Oh, being very responsible and put it on mute.
Don't want the noises off. That's the thing.
We'll do that in time for 7.
Yeah.
It has just started absolutely raining quite persistently here. After a brief bit of sunshine, but I think there's a rainbow. Yay.
Well,
There
we go.
And where are you sitting?
Brilliant sunshine.
Oh, you're just showing off, Dave,
Bit
there.
of breeze.
Look at
I
that.
should be out beekeeping.
Sunshine there too.
Well, I'm in Yeovil and we've got bright sunshine at the moment. Long may it last.
Right. Well, I'm in Swiss Cottage and it's very sunny here. So.
Is it just raining in Oldham? Is that the problem?
I'm afraid so. Yes. You're the wrong side of the country.
That's the northwest.
Yeah.
Oh, we're down in Somerset and the sun always shines on the righteous. It's either that or the devil looks after his own. I'm not sure which.
Well, I don't know about that. Anyway. Well.
No, it can't rain for the next 2 hours, please. I've just been doing some painting outside and I hope it hasn't skinned over yet, so.
Right. Well, I've just taken the cover off my hives, which was deflecting the rain, so I hope they're going to be all right. But,
and where are you?
Swiss Cottage.
Swiss Cottage.
North London, yeah.
North London.
Yeah.
Ah, yes. Yes, I used to have friends that lived in Belsize Square.
Oh, right. Very smart. Yes.
Well, this was back in the 60s. It wasn't quite as smart then.
I can tell you it's very smart now.
Yes.
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 It's very close to where I live. Yes.
Ah.
But,
yes. Happy days.
No.
So how many hives have you had?
Well, I've got one colony on the go at the moment. I started the year with 2, but one died out with just in the back end of the winter. But I've got a strong colony now. And in fact, I've just been up to put in the clearer board to take the honey off tomorrow. And I'm looking forward to probably about 35 or 40 pounds of honey. Maybe a bit more from the 2 super. I've got three frames One I'm going to leave for the winter, depending on what we hear this evening. And the other two I'm going to take tomorrow. And I reckon I'm probably going to get about 45 pounds, which I think is pretty good.
What's the brood chamber like? Has it got plenty of stores down there, or is it?
Yes, it has. It's 1.5. I've put in a deep brood chamber and a shallow soup. So the brood's got 1.5, which I did at the beginning of the year, because last year I had a very, very strong colony, which actually swarmed. But this one, I split the last colony, and this is the split. And I think she's going to do the same again next spring. So I'm going to give them plenty of room. But I'm also going to leave a full super of honey as well, so that they've got plenty of food. So unless I'm being over generous.
I think you are, yes.
Oh, I might take another colony, another frame off tomorrow then.
Well, if you've got a super on top of your brood chamber that is full,
yeah,
then I really like my colonies, and I'm on just single brood, but I like the brood box to be about 50 pound in weight.
right.
And if you've got that, you're going to be, and then check it between Christmas Day and New Year's Day,
Right.
and if need be, put some fondant in.
Right. Well, I mean, it's at the moment it's comfortably over 50 pounds. So.
Well then, I think you're being over generous.
Oh right. Well, okay.
Yes. Have a bit more to put on your porridge in the morning.
Yes. Well, a bit more to give my daughters, who then give it to their friends, who then give it to their friends. Yes.
Yes. Well, that's how it goes. Yes.
Can I ask a question, please, that gentleman?
Hmm.
Hi. Do you under or over super for the winter?
I do not over super, but I put a super underneath with 2 empty frames placed the warm way, because I think it just acts as a wind barrier and puts the queen 1 story up above the cold wind. And it gives the bees, if they do get the chance to venture out, something to climb up when they re-enter, but also 2 frames of drawn empty comb that they can walk up, and it just gives that barrier, I feel.
I
Is
suspect
there a-
Dave might tell us some different
I think
ways
we'll
of
learn a
doing
lot more
things.
tonight,
Yeah,
which
sorry.
will tell us all that we're talking a load of rubbish.
Interesting rubbish, nonetheless.
Well, we're talking through experience.
Well, the thing is, it's, as I always say with beekeeping, it's what works for you.
Mm.
And the
You
bees.
get a room of 10 beekeepers, 1 question, and you get 20 answers. And it all works because it's all
30.
right, because it works for them.
But we don't have much chance this evening, as we've got over 200 people in, so that's 200
that's
different
wonderful.
opinions.
All right.
That's great.
Well, there'll be a lot of knowledge coming out of this evening then.
Yes.
Interesting discussion. I'm going to kick off, if that's all right with everybody. It is 7 o'clock. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the talk. So during the talk, I'd be grateful if you could keep your microphones on mute. And then at the end of the session, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions. What we're suggesting is that if you want to ask a question, use the raise hand function, and that will bring you to the top of the screen and an opportunity to ask the question. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce David Bonham this evening. David kept bees since 2006. He was a seasonal bee inspector, master beekeeper. He works with bees abroad, and he's going to talk to us this evening about preparation for winter. Very timely talk, I fancy, and I'm going to be listening with great interest. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to David Bonner. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, everybody, for coming along this evening to talk about it. Just been listening with some interest to the kind of conversation that's going on. I always think that whenever a beekeeper asks a question, the answer always starts with the words, it depends. Because it depends on so many things. But let's see where this evening's talk takes us. I'm just going to share a screen. See if we can do that. Where's it gone? Okay, hopefully you can all see
Yeah.
a screen now. Right, preparing bees for the winter. I give these talks, and I was very pleased to be invited by the BBK to do this evening, but I also give these talks to, and on other subjects, to associations, either via Zoom or in person, because Kathy and I support the charity Bees Abroad, Kathy being my wife, and we have some active projects in Uganda. So we're always trying to raise money to support those projects. And it's always interesting to think about the different contexts of beekeeping in this sense. So let me pose you a question. Just think about and what 2 words or 1 or 2 words would you use to describe your beekeeping? Now, I don't expect you to shout them all out, but the kind of examples I've been given in the past are challenging, a hobby, relaxing, frustrating, peaceful, they've had painful. So they've all been words like that. In Uganda, when we have our projects, we ask that question to our people there, the people you know there, the words they give us are life-changing. And that's why Kathy and I support Bees Abroad and we have projects, because when you go there and you transfer the beekeeping skills, it literally is life-changing for these poor communities. So I don't intend to go any further in that this evening, just a bit of that. But if you want to know more about that, or you want me to talk about our adventures, then just contact with me outside of this. So I'm going to skip over a couple of slides and then get into this evening's talk. Right. Preparing bees for the winter. It really is at the right time of year to be talking about this. And it's been alluded to already in some of the conversations before the meeting started proper, that in beekeeping there is no single way of doing it right. It's a very broad church. There are lots of different ways of doing it right. Conversely, there are many ways of doing it wrong. And this evening, I will just give you a view of some of my ways and some of my views on this, which work for me and which I've seen through my experience work in practice. And then I'll leave you to think about it and ask questions at the end. So what we're going to think about this evening, right? We're going to think about the health of bees. We're going to think about how strong the colonies are or should be. We'll think about stores. We'll think about queens, state the queen is in. We'll think about the hives and the location of the apiary sites. We'll talk a little bit about predators. And then we'll end up talking about beekeepers and their role in all of this. Because preparing bees for the winter is all about doing things for the bees need to minimize the risk that they will die over the winter and that will come next April that will end up with nice strong colonies. So in the first part of that, on the health of the bees, let's just think about healthy bees. Now, where does that start? We'd like to think our bees are healthy, and we should be looking at them in that way. And at this time of year, we should be doing a complete and thorough disease inspection. We should be going through every colony on every frame which has got brood on it and shaking the bees off and inspecting it and making sure that there are no nasty things lurking inside the hive. We should do this kind of disease inspection twice a year as a minimum, one in the springtime and one just before we put the bees to bed in the winter. So we've got a good idea of that the bees are healthy and there's nothing untoward in there. Now, there's an onus on that, and that means that as beekeepers, we need to know what healthy bees look like, both adult bees as well as the larvae and the pupa. And that's a responsibility we have. If as beekeepers we do not know and we cannot recognize healthy brood, healthy larvae, healthy pupa and healthy adult bees, then quite frankly, we shouldn't be keeping bees. It's as simple as that. The reason for that is that if you know what healthy looks like, then when you see something which isn't like that, as a minimum, you can ask for help. More experienced beekeeper. If you think it's something worse, then a bee inspector. So at this time of year, we should be organising ourselves now and doing a complete disease inspection of all our colonies to make sure there's nothing untoward in there. So that's one thing we can do. But we've also got to understand about the bees themselves. Winter bees are quite different to summer bees. They are physically different. The winter bees have more and larger fat bodies. So this little picture here, if you can see the cursor, on the right-hand side is the abdomen of a winter bee, and all that white are fat bodies inside the abdomen. And on the left-hand side is a summer bee, the one we'd see in the normal season. You can see it's virtually devoid of fat bodies. And the fat bodies are really important to help the bee survive the winter. The other thing that happens in the winter bee, or let's turn it around a little bit, in the summer bee, the nurse bees work in the colony, and then for a period of time they have hypopharyngeal glands, which are located behind the eyes, and they produce essentially, in mammals, the milk for the young, if you think of it in that terms. So what the hypopharyngeal glands produce is fed and helps to create royal jelly, which is essential to the early life part of the larvae. And then after a few days of use, they cease to work, and the nurse bees in the hive move on to other things. In winter bees, those hypopharyngeal glands remain active. They remain big and plump and ready for use. And the reason they remain ready for use is not that they're going to be used over the winter, even though there may be a little bit of brood in the colony. It's so they're ready to use in spring next year when the queen starts to lay again. Because when the queen starts to lay again in the spring next year, we've got all these bees in the colony, which are by then several months old, and we're relying upon them to use the hypopharyngeal glands to feed the babies. Right? It's not just the new ones out of the eggs. So over the winter, the hypopharyngeal glands of the winter bees remain intact and remain working. The other thing that happens is because the bees aren't foraging, they haven't become foragers, and because there's very little or no brood to produce, there's a change in the body, a thing called juvenile hormone, and in essence, the aging process of the bee slows down. And if you could work this out and bottle it for humans, you would be a billionaire very quickly. Where in essence, the aging process doesn't stop but slows right down, and hence these winter bees are able to live for up to 6 months. So we've got to understand this, because the role that we have to play now as beekeepers is to make sure that the bees which are being produced in the colony now, as the queen is starting to reduce her laying, are going to be the winter bees, and we've got to make sure that we do everything possible to make sure they're nice and healthy so they'll live the 6 months, right? So healthy bees, we talked about that. If we've made sure there's no disease or no bad disease in the colony, we now think about the winter bees, and the big key factor with which affects the health of the winter bees is varroa. Because one of the aspects of varroa, the impact of varroa on a bee, is that it reduces the lifespan. And that's the last thing we want when we're talking about winter bees. We want those winter bees to be living those 4, 5, 6 months. We don't want them to be dying after 2, 3 or 4 months. So in order to do that, it's absolutely critical as beekeepers that we know how to manage varroa levels. We need to understand the level of varroa in our colonies. And we need to understand what we've got to do to reduce the levels to reduce the numbers to a level where the bees can manage and remain healthy. And one of the things we can do to help us do that is actually to use approved products. The products which are on the market, yes, people say they're expensive and this, that, and the other, but in essence, have been through a laboratory testing, and with the formulation they have and being applied the way the manufacturers say they're applied, they'll do the job. We've got colonies which are quite valuable, and I see absolutely no reason. In fact, I find it totally illogical where beekeepers are quite happy to use what I would regard as kind of like snake oil treatments on them, things they've read on the internet, and put those valuable colonies at risk on the with little scientific background before that. The other key thing about varroa and varroa treatment against varroa is the importance of timing. And I don't think enough beekeepers really understand that sentence. Timing is absolutely critical when we are dealing with varroa and treating for varroa. So let me just go through a bit of a graph, if I may. Hopefully, a lot of you will recognize this graph. So the blue line is the brood going from January through to December. It's starting off with virtually zero brood in January, which is where we used to be. And then the queen starts to lay, and then there's a rapid build-up of brood in a colony, peaking around about June, and then tailing off again to the brood nest reducing in size to virtually zero again. The adult bees, as a result of that, kind of lags behind it. So we got in January, we've got the remainder of the winter bees actually dying off before the new brood is emerging. So we've got a really critical time here where there's a growing amount of brood in the colony and a reducing number of bees in the colony to look after it. After that, after we get through this risk period, the number of adult bees starts to accelerate as well, in line with the amount of brood, to a point where the number of adults in the colony peaks around about July time and then tails off. And that isn't a coincidence, because these bees have been evolving for about 21 million years. And what happens is that in our temperament and our climate, then the maximum amount of forage there used to be, or there was from an evolutionary point of view, the main flow happened in July, early August time. So the bees evolved so that their colony numbers of foragers was at their peak then, so that they could take advantage of that to build up the winter stores. Once that had been done, then it was pointless having so many bees in the colony. So the queen is controlled, so her laying eases off, and the number of adult bees reduces to a level where the colony can survive the winter and thermoregulate itself over the winter, ready for the next year. Varroa kind of stopped that. So let's have a look at some of this now. So round about back end of August, September time, the larvae, which is the eggs which are being produced to produce the larvae, are actually going to be the winter bees. So from a couple of weeks, probably already, but certainly in a couple of weeks' time, the larvae which are being produced in the colony are going to be the winter bees. They're the bees that you want to be living for about 6 months, right through till February, March next year. So the winter bees emerge 3 weeks later, in this kind of time scale, and then progressively from about January onwards, in increasing numbers, they start dying. Round about January time, when the queen starts to lay again, we get the eggs will become the larvae. They will be the future generation, the spring bees, upon which the colony is going to depend to nurse and look after this really rapid rise in egg laying. Right? So the summer bees start coming out in about February time. So we've got winter bees dying in January time, and February time we've got the smaller number but increasing number of summer bees emerging. So we've got this real risk period of bees dying off before the new bees are in sufficient quantities to take over. So that's why kind of February time is a really risky time for colonies, because if that equation isn't correct, there's a good chance the colony will die. So varroa came along and we started treating for varroa. So what happens is we treat for varroa in line with the winter bees, back end of August time. That what's happening then is it's killing the varroa off, so that varroa is dead, and therefore the winter bee larvae isn't going to be affected. Their development is going to be affected by a high population of varroa. So that means the winter bees, their lifespan is going to be normal. It's not going to be a reduced lifespan, which would happen if the varroa had affected the winter bee larvae. If we then treat again for varroa in December, January time, then what we're doing is we're trying to look after the spring bee larva, make sure that's healthy, because we want that to be healthy and vigorous and live a long time to look after the emerging brood, to drive it up this curve here. So we have a risk area, which I've just discussed, about this area, which is naturally there. Right, so that's if we treat for varroa in August and again in December, January. Now, what happens if we treat late? Let's say we put the varroa treatment on in October. That means that all of this winter bee larvae here from September through October has been impacted by varroa. Right, the varroa have been in the cells reproducing, and the lifespan of that larvae is likely to be affected and reduced. So we've got poor quality winter bee larvae. So instead of the winter bees dying here, it's got a reduced lifespan, so it's not dying early. Because we've treated late here, we've got these poor winter bees at this level. Right? Similarly, if we do our winter varroa treatment late, it means that the spring bee larvae is also unhealthy and is not really capable of driving the population up this curve that we want it to be. Right? So we've got poor quality spring bee larvae, which means we've got poor quality nurse bees coming out. So the risk area of a colony dying is now much extended. So it's not just a case of doing varroa treatment, it's actually a case of doing the varroa treatment at the right time. And we've got to think about the impact of the varroa on both the winter bees and also the spring bees, and do it at the right time. So if we do that, then the health of the colony going into the winter and also in the springtime, that we are reducing the risks of that colony dying out quite significantly. What about colony strength? Weak colonies will not survive the winter. Right? If you've got healthy colonies which are weak, unite them together. And if you've got sick or dubious colonies, cull them. If your colonies are still weak and have been weak for some time without any real reason at this time of year, then the chances of them coming through the winter into healthy colonies next year is very, very low. So in some ways, you're wasting your time in terms of treating them and feeding them. So you may need to make a hard decision. Uniting suspicious or weak colonies and dubious colonies to healthy colonies may mean you transfer something into the healthy colonies, which will impact them. So I wouldn't be doing that, but I'd be taking some hard decisions on that. So you're better to go have a few colonies, strong colonies that survive the winter, rather than going into a winter with a number of colonies, most of them which are weak. So when you look under a crown board, you should be seeing colonies at this time of year which are pretty much filling the brood box on the smaller colonies. And if it's a colony which is only covering a few seams of brood, and it has been like that for a while, then I think you need to think about making a hard decision and culling them or doing something drastic. So message there is fewer strong colonies going into the winter. Unite your healthy, strong colonies, and you minimize the risk in the springtime. There seems to be a culture in beekeeping that it's the number of colonies you have which seems to be important. How many times have you heard the conversation start between beekeepers in terms of how many colonies do you run? It's not necessarily that important, the number of colonies you run. It's how successful the colonies that you do run are. That's probably important. So colony strength, really important. Unite colonies together, get them nice and strong, minimize the risk in the springtime. Stores. There was a bit of conversation about stores before the call started proper. A colony in a national brood box needs about 35 pounds of stores to last the winter. And that's usable stores. It isn't stores which are set solid, usable stores. And that equates to 7 brood frames full of stores. So we've got 11 frames in a national box, which means you've got 4 frames left for a brood nest or for pollen and things, which is adequate for over the winter time. But we need to manage our colonies so that we have the bees have got access to 35 pounds of stores, 7 brood frames full of stores. And so that's okay, right? But we've got to remember that if we've got 7 frames of stores in there and a couple of frames of foundation doesn't hold anything. It's a actual waste of space. And with this time of year and progressively, the bees are less and less likely to draw any wax out. So foundation in a colony, if you're expecting bees to draw it out without doing real specialist manipulations on them at this time of year, then you're going to wait quite a long time. And as I said, usable stores are useful. Rape honey and ivy honey, the set's really hard. Ivy honey harder than rape honey, it where it crystallizes, and the bees find it very difficult to eat. They need a lot of water to break it down and metabolize it, and they will prefer other sources than that. And I try to manage my colonies so they're well fed and full of liquid stores or floral stores, runny stores, before any ivy comes out. So the bees have little opportunity for going and working the ivy and then coming back and filling the brood box with that. I don't know what it was like in your areas, but last year we had a very mild into the autumn and the bees worked the ivy really well. Fortunately, I'd had the feeding and everything done by then, so I didn't have much problem with ivy in the brood box. But in essence, as a mindset, by the end of September, all the work should be done to have prepared the bees, sorted the health out, done the varroa treatment in plenty of time, and fed so that they're all done and dusted for the winter. Right? That's the time scale, end of September. Yes, it can vary if people are taking the colony off to the heather. How you deal with colonies coming back from the heather and prepare them for winter is not really the subject of discussion this evening. We're talking about kind of mainstream beekeeping and the hobby beekeeper. I'm happy to talk to people offline about bees coming back from the heather and looking after them. But this evening, I want people to get in mind that end of September, all done and dusted for the winter. What about queens, right? Ideally, going into the winter, we want young, vigorous queens, right? That's what we want. Old queens may fail over the winter. They may become drone layers. That quite often happens. They may not have the energy or the vigor to drive the rapid growth in the brood nest that we need in April, May next year. So ideally, young, vigorous queens going into the winter so that we mitigate this risk. It's okay to requeen in September. So it's pretty successful for me. The varroa treatment's been done. The bees have been fed. Might use a little bit of feed to simulate the nectar flow. Robbing seems to have gone, the wasps are on the way out, and the bees tend to be pretty calm. So I find kind of, if I need to requeen with a new queen, one I might have bred through the year, I've kept in a nuke box for quite a while. September is an okay month to do it, getting that done. But the message is young, vigorous queens going into the winter. Let them get established and let them come out in the springtime, really vigorous and getting those eggs laid and that brood nest, number of eggs being laid in the brood nest size growing quickly. So we talk queens now. What about the hives themselves? What about accommodation? We need to make sure it's weatherproof. Repair any holes and gaps. And the bees will repair the smaller ones with propolis, but the bigger ones, we want to make sure nothing can get in, the weather can't get in, that the bees are going to be snug in that because they're going to be spending several months in there, right? What I always do as well, thinking ahead to the natural mortality of the bees, I always put my entrance block in smiling way. I like to look along my row of hives and see them all smiling back at me, nice happy hives. So that to me is good. I don't like it when I'm seeing that. And there's logic behind this because some hives are better than others, but sometimes in the springtime, when you go to change the floor, you lift the brood box and on the floor of the hive, there is a mass of bees, maybe it's half an inch deep. The colony seems to be okay, but the natural mortality of the bees just seems to have done that. And sometimes that depth of bees can be so thick that if you have the entrance block in the sad way, it actually blocks the entrance and the bees can't get out to fly and go on clearing flights on the nice days. Whereas if you put it in the happy way, the smiling way, there is actually a gap of wood of about 1/4 of an inch or so below the bottom end of the smile, where if there are a pile of dead bees inside the hive, the bees can walk over that pile of bees and still get out to fly. So I always just, as a matter of course, have entrance blocks in which are nice and happy and smiling at me. So that's good. That is bad. Sorry, that's the frowny way. Okay. But if you do that, you can see what I mean. This bit of wood at the bottom gives the bees a chance that if there is a pile of dead bees inside, they can crawl over it and still get access to the outside. Right? So that's good. What about the location? We tend to go to our apiary sites in finish weather. We don't necessarily see them in the worst weather. But let's think about a bit of frost pockets. Are they going to be continuously cold through the winter? Which way is the wind going to affect them? Or what about water? So what's a frost pocket? Right. What happens is warm air rises and cold air falls down. So if your apiary site, your bees, your colony is in a bit of a dip like this, in the winter, they may be sat in cold air the whole time because the cold air just fills that pocket and it never gets pushed away. And if there's a frost of overnight frost, you may well see that the sides, the ground frost on that stays there all day, regardless of the sun, depending on where the sun hits. So are your bees like that? You can get a frost pocket even if you're on the side of a hill or a slopey garden, because if there's a bit of a dip, it still falls there. Or even the cold air will roll down the hill, and if there's a solid barrier, the cold air will build up behind it. So whereas the barrier may be nice protection from wind or sun, whatever, at other times of the year, in the winter, it may be a real problem. So think about frost pockets. Are your bees going to get some warm air some of the time over the winter? Be really critical looking at your apiary site. Wind direction, is there some kind of buffering around the front of the hive or around the hives to give them some protection from the wind? I know from my experience that I've got an apiary site, which is a nice apiary site in the summer. It's south facing, there's a hedge behind it, and there's probably about on a farmer's field, and there's probably 30, 40 acres of field in front of them. And it wasn't until the first winter when I visited them one time just to check everything was okay, that I realized that the wind, even though it was coming from the south, was whistling across this open land and giving the hives a real buffering. They had a real problem. So I needed to do something to give them a bit of protection on that. So just think about wind and protection to give your bees a chance to have a bit extra protection and insulation from any cold wind. And the last one is water. And I don't mean flooding, I mean just standing water. This is a flooded area. Wouldn't be any good for bees. But even if the ground is continually damp and soggy without necessarily being flooded, it wouldn't be good for the bees. You need something which is going to have the ground where it's a bit drained more, and the bees have got a chance to be on solid ground as opposed to soggy ground. So what I'm trying to say to you is take a critical look at all your apiary sites, wherever they are, and just give them a view of kind of, are they constantly cold? Therefore, the bees constantly cold. Is there sufficient shelter from the wind? Because the wind chill can be quite severe on a colony. And does the ground get a chance to dry out, particularly after heavy rain, or if there's been snow on the ground and it suddenly melts away? Think about that. We quite often think about moving hives in the winter. I've done it a couple of times. I never do it now. So what about moving hives? To me, do not move hive when the bees are in a tight cluster. If you think about what's happening in the hive, the temperature's low, the bees aren't flying, that's why we're thinking of moving them. What's happening is the bees are in a tight cluster, so the inside is warm, they're thermoregulating that, but the outside bees are at about 10 degrees centigrade. They're virtually on the comatose level, right? They don't have much strength, they don't have much movement. And if you start moving the hive, all very well if you're moving it gently, maybe it's 2 or 3 feet in an apiary, but if you're moving it in the back of a car or even on a trailer, the vibration of that can cause the bees on the outside of the cluster to fall off and onto the floor. And they've got no energy at all to climb back up. So you've taken them out of the normal environment by this, and what you risk happening is that all of those bees on the outside of the cluster just falling off. Falling onto the floor, and they just don't have the energy or the temperature to be able to climb back up, so they die. So if you're going to move hives over the winter time, choose a day when you're pretty sure that the bees are out of the cluster, might even be flying a little bit, and move them so that they're all settled in the new location. Maybe it's lunchtime-ish, just after lunch, so they've got a chance, while there's still a bit of warmth in the day, to reorganize themselves before the cold temperature of the night comes along and maybe catches them out. So don't just think that the books say move when the bees aren't flying. Think about what's going on inside the hive. Think about the cluster and think about those bees on the outside of the cluster. What about predators? Mouse guards, obvious. We really need those on the hives before the first frosts, because what will happen is that the mice, as the frosts come along, will be looking for somewhere nice and warm and dry to stay, and they'll move into your hives, or the chances they'll move into your hives. So the mouse guards need to be on before the first frosts, and you leave them on until virtually the nighttime frosts have just about finished. So maybe it's not as late as that, but certainly at the end of March, early April, by which time the mice will be looking for places to go nest and breed. So mouse guards on by the end of October. Woodpeckers, we need some protection. So the way green woodpeckers work is, it's not the spotted woodpeckers, it's the green woodpeckers, is if they find an apiary site and they learn that they can get into the bees and the brood and the food inside, then they will teach the rest of the green woodpeckers, and they will teach their family in the following spring that apiary sites are a good place to go. So if you're not being impacted by green woodpeckers, you're lucky. I'm touching wood at the minute. But once a green woodpecker finds your site and starts damaging it, finds it and get food there, then it will teach its family. So you've got to do things and protect your hive so you break that cycle. May take a winter or two, or you may, if you've got your apiary sites in woodland or where there's lots of woodpeckers, then you may want to cover them up as a matter of course. Yeah. So we've got predators, but let's just recap a little in terms of the two biggest killers of honeybee colonies. Varroa is the number one. We need to treat for varroa. We need to think about how we manage varroa. Yes, we've had lots in the press and more interesting research on hygienic bees and bees adapting themselves to live with varroa and uncapping and recapping. Work that Steve Martin has done. That's all great. That's light at the end of the tunnel. But even Professor Steve Martin himself says we've got to keep treating. We've got to keep on top of this so we understand this situation more. So remember what I said earlier on? It's not a case of just having a tick box to say that we have treated for varroa. The important thing is that we have treated for varroa at the right time. And it's not a case of convenience to us as beekeepers that, oh, we got time at the weekend or we haven't got time. It's what the bees need. That's our priority at this time of year. We've got to treat at the right time for the benefit of the bees. The other big killer is poor beekeeping. And maybe harsh to say it, but sometimes the standard of beekeeping is way below what it should be. And sometimes we need to look at ourselves and say, can I improve? So what is it with beekeepers? We've got to do the things at the right time for the bees. The bees have a life cycle. They've evolved to live in a certain way. They have certain behaviors, and we as beekeepers need to understand that and be doing things at the right time for the bees. We need to be preparing ourselves and have an action plan so that, in essence, our bees are to bed for the winter by the end of September. And so I don't know what your action plan is. I'm on course. I'll be treating for varroa in the next few days, and then I'm getting the feed ready for that as well. I'm going round the very strong colonies. I'm doing brood and a half, and I always put the super underneath for the bees without a queen excluder, because the way the bees work is that in the autumn the bees move down the hive and live at the bottom of the hive, i.e. in the super where you want the stores, and in the spring they move up and the queen starts to lay in the top. So the way I want to work is if the colony is so strong I need to brood and a half it, I'll put the super underneath, feed them so they fill the brood box and the super, and then come back end of March next year, I know the bees will have moved up, the queen will be starting to lay in the brood box, and the super should be empty of everything, so I can take it away and melt it all down. I can't reuse that super for honey because it may have had brood in it, and it certainly may be contaminated with the medicines I put on for the varroa. So in the autumn time, the bees move down to the bottom. In the springtime, they move up. So that's part of my preparation. Then the difficult thing, because we're not very patient as beekeepers, we leave them alone until about mid-April next year. We don't mess around with them. We don't go in. We keep away from the urge to go in just to have a look. Okay, mid-April, if you're down in Somerset or the southwest, may be a bit late because their climate is slightly different. If you're living in Scotland, it may be too early. So obviously there's a common sense judgment depending on where you live, but in essence, you leave them on the right temperature, ambient temperature, so that you can start disturbing the brood nest and the brood comes in the brood nest with minimal impact on the bees. And I think lots of beekeepers have great difficulty leaving the bees alone. They just like to have a look and see what's going on. There are other caveats, of course. We have to do some kind of December and January varroa treatment, so that we're getting the health of the new larvae, which are going to be the spring bees, as good as possible. And we got to heft, and may have to do emergency feeding. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Sorry. Tea break time. So we got to do that now. Varroa treatment in the winter. I think that whereas we human beings have got January the 1st as our New Year's Day, in the rest of the natural world, I think New Year's Day is December the 21st in the Northern Hemisphere, because that's the shortest day. And the next day, daylight is slightly longer, and living creatures, insects and plants and the like, are very sensitive to the length of daylight hours. So I have a view which says things start to happen within the hive, even though very slowly, after December the 21st. So my oxalic acid, my epibioxal type treatment to do in the winter, I always do around about December the 21st or the 22nd. So it's in line with the bees' New Year's Day. And it seems to work. Seems to work, touch wood. The bees tend to come out into the springtime healthy without much problem. So, right. What is good beekeeping then? So we talked about preparing bees for the winter. We've really got to focus on the health and the disease side of it, as well as a husbandry side. To me, good beekeeping, it's not about having more and more colonies. As a bee inspector, I would visit apiary sites which had large number of colonies in them, and quite frankly, there were nothing more than lots of little splits. In some cases, there was hardly a viable hive in them, but the beekeeper was able to say they had X number of colonies. So it's not about having more and more colonies, it's about having good, healthy, strong colonies. And if that means you have only half as many, that's fine. That's a good position to be at. To get to that, a beekeeper, I think, needs to improve the knowledge. They need to know more about the bees. They need more about beekeeping, the bee behavior, what's going on in the world, what are the manipulations. I think that comes from ongoing education. What are people doing in terms of improving their education and keep going forward with that in a positive way? And so if you want to be a better beekeeper, I think you need to challenge how you do things. You need to keep thinking that, can I do this better? Am I doing this right for the bees? Is it at the right time? Am I disturbing them too much? Where do you get that information? You can read it from authoritative books. The internet is a fantastic thing, but there's a whole load of rubbish on it, I tell you. When I've been trying to put talks together and looking for evidence, you go on and you just kind of despair at how much rubbish there is there. So you read authoritative books, go to authoritative sources, attend lectures, do what you're doing tonight, listen to in a critical way to what other people have got to say, what their opinions are. Don't be afraid to go on training courses. You can always learn. You might have been on them before, you might have learned them in a different way, but something will always come across. Ultimately, I think you need to focus on the needs of the bees. You've got to think like a bee. What's happening inside the hive at the minute? What's likely to happen? Am I going to disturb it by doing what I'm going to do? I'm a great believer in what the BBK have got in terms of structured education. They've got this examinations and assessments, starting off at the basic, which is fairly straightforward for a new beekeeper, building right up with more and more knowledge and information and experience. And it's split really nicely between written modules like exams, and not everybody likes exams, but also the blue boxes are practical things. Like the honeybee health certificate, I'm a great advocate of. I think if any one of these will improve your beekeeping out of all proportion to the length of time it takes you to do the certificate, the honeybee health one will. It's a fantastic assessment to get to prepare for and to actually do. The general husbandry is a big step on from that, but it introduces other aspects like queen rearing and the module. So I'm a great advocate. I think this is a really powerful framework. If beekeepers truly want to improve their knowledge and their skill as a beekeeper, then I think getting involved and doing some of that is great. Even if you just do the studying, if you never sit an exam, I can guarantee your beekeeping will improve if you take up a thread of that. So what have I waffled on about? We've talked about the health of bees. We've talked about queens. We've talked about the hives, looking after them. We've talked about looking at the apiary sites in a critical fashion. We've talked about varroa at some length. Remember, varroa treatment is all about doing the treatment at the right time. It's all focused on the health of the larvae and maximizing the lifespan of the bee by reducing the impact of varroa. So I think what I said, I hope if you digest and think about it, I hope it actually makes your beekeeping more enjoyable. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take questions. I'm going to stop the share now.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
that was a rattle through.
Thank you, Dave, for a fascinating lecture. The questions are coming thick and fast. The first one to get a hand up was Diane Lynch. If you could unmute yourself, Diane, and ask your question.
Yes, hi. Thanks very much. I was a bit confused about the feeding during the winter, where you were saying put the super underneath the brood box and no queen excluder.
Right.
What I've just done is extracted honey, and at the moment there's the brood, the queen excluder, a full soup, nearly a full super, but it's not.
Sorry, Diane, you cut out for quite a bit in the middle of that.
Sorry. Well, did you hear my question? I won't go into what I'm doing at the moment, but did you hear my question?
You talked about the super feeding. Now,
yeah.
Okay, let me just rewind a little bit.
Feeding for winter, yeah.
Feeding for winter, right. Feeding for winter, that you've taken the honey off. If the colony size is sufficient so that it will only fit in a brood box, then overwinter it in a brood box. If you think about if you were to go to your hives tomorrow and there may be 4, and if you go to hives tomorrow and there may be, let's say, 10 seams of bees in it, right? Then if that's all that there are there, then there's no need to go brood and a half, right? Because if you think that in 8 weeks' time, a large portion of those bees will be dead because their summer bees dying off.
Yeah.
And the brood nest is reducing, so the number of bees are reducing. So what you see tomorrow is probably going to be the maximum you see till next season. Yeah. Maybe exaggerating there, but it's like that. So you feed the bees the syrup that they need, and in my view, that you keep feeding till they stop taking it down. Yeah? And the bees, once the box is full or wherever they put it, that'll be it. Now, if the colony is so big that the bees are in, let's say, for example, you've extracted honey, you've put a super back on to clean out, or there's still some in it, and the bees are still filling the brood box and the super, then a brood box isn't big enough for them over the winter. So you take a super and put it underneath without the queen excluded. So you've got a brood and a half, and then you feed that till they stop taking it down. Right? And they'll put the feed in the super in the bottom and in the brood box. Does that make sense?
No, sorry, I got lost. So the situation I have is a brood box, a full super on top, a brood box, queen excluder, full super, but not capped. It's not capped honey. And then last week I extracted from the top super, which was full, and after I'd extracted, I put that back on top for them to clean up. So that's the situation of the hive at the moment.
Okay, so the hive has got 2 supers on.
It's got 2 supers on, one at the top which is empty, because I put it back for them to clean, and the one underneath that is full but not capped.
Okay,
More or
and how
less
many
full.
and how many bees are in the colony?
Oof,
Are they filling the brood box and the super, or just filling the brood box?
just filling the brood box.
Okay, well, in if that was my colony, I would be only wanting to overwinter them as a brood box.
Yeah.
Right. So the wet super you put back on when it's dry, I would take away, make sure it was good enough to store for the winter. And the
Yeah.
super which has only got part stuff on in,
Yeah.
yeah, you can either, if your bees are healthy, move it to a stronger colony which may need it to put underneath as a brood and a half.
I've only got one
Or-
colony. I've only got one hive.
Okay. See, the difficulty I have in saying to you put it underneath as food for the bees for the winter is that you're giving the bees a brood box and a super to look after for the winter.
Yeah.
Yeah. So some people would say give them that super underneath the brood box as food for the winter. Yeah. But you still need to feed them so they had plenty in there, and you may find that come the springtime that you've overfed them. And there's not much that, yeah. That's why every question in beekeeping starts with it depends.
Thank you. Lisa Edwards next. If you'd like to unmute, Lisa. You're still muted, Lisa. There we go.
Hello. Thank you. That was really informative. That was fab. I'm new to this. I started last year with a nook and transferred them to a hive in the spring. So far so good. Just a quick question. I've put a water source near the bees. And they've been really going for it in warmer weather. What do they do about that during winter? Will some of them still come out to get water, or because last year when they were going through the winter, I was feeding them fondant, but obviously not putting any water anywhere. I didn't notice them coming out very much to do that. What do they do?
There's a lot of water vapor produced by the bees through natural respiration and then normal metabolism.
Right.
So that there is water that produced just by breathing, in the same way that you and I, as we breathe, we're actually breathing out water. Yeah. And there's also in the flow of air around the inside of the hive, that air can be quite moist. So they can actually get water from that as well.
Right. So I don't need to worry about
particularly if it condenses on a cold inside part of the hive, there is a natural airflow and ventilation around the hive.
Right. Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. And Susan Lawson, if you could unmute, please.
That's great, David. It was really, really interesting. Just two questions. One just out of interest and the second one more practical. The first one, in a warm country when it's warm over winter, they don't put them to bed, they just keep producing? And then the second question is, when do you know if you need to emergency feed?
Okay, right then. First one, in a warm country, the bees don't cluster. So for example, in Uganda, which we work 100 miles north of the equator, the bees work all year. Yeah, there is no clustering, there's no winter bees, there's no, they follow the cycle of the forage, and there are three points of time in the year when the bees work a nectar flow. So their clustering is really the way they've evolved to handle temperatures which drop down below 10 degrees and then into freezing. Right, the second one was, go on,
When
it's
do you need,
interesting, I forgot the second.
When do you need to an emergency feed? How do you know that they've used their stores up?
Well, in essence, when you're hefting the hives, if you are essentially weighing the hives by lifting them slightly in from January, February, March, you do it regularly, you can tell by the weight when the hive is getting light. And when it's getting light, you think it's getting light, then you need to get some fondant put on the on the feed hole of the crown board. Yeah. So the other way in which you know that bees are starting to get to that point is it's always the weight that tells you first. But you know that the bees are working okay is, remember I said that in the autumn the bees go down, right? So if you were to look in and take the roof off a hive when the bees are at the bottom, and you looked at the feed holes in the crown board, there'd be no bees there. You wouldn't see anything. Yeah, for all intents and purposes, there'd be nothing in the hive. There'd be no activity. If you were doing that, if you took the roof off in February time on a colony which was eating its stores, and you start seeing the bees around the feed hole at the top, it's because they've moved back up and they're starting to eat the food in the top of the brood box. Yeah, and it's always a sign that the things are it's empty at the bottom and they've worked their way back up again. But
Okay.
the number one reason, number one way of telling if they need feed is by hefting, by weighing the hive.
And how often would you do that in January, February, March time?
I would do it about every fortnight. Initially every fortnight, and then as we get into the back end of February, March, maybe once a week, because by then the brood nest is starting to build up. And as the brood nest builds up, what happens is that if there's no brood in the colony, the bees can live with a temperature of about 20 degrees centigrade. So they don't need a lot to eat. They don't need to eat a lot of food in order to maintain that temperature. As soon as there's a brood nest, they need to keep the temperature of the brood nest at 34 degrees centigrade to incubate the eggs and protect the larvae. And the bigger the brood nest gets as the queen lays more and more eggs, as she starts to lay more in January, February, then the bigger the area that needs to be kept at 34.5 degrees. So they're using more food. So come January time, when there's only going to be a small amount or no brood in the colony, depending upon the winter, then I would heft, and then I maybe heft once a fortnight. As soon as I know that the bees are building up, I go to heft once a week, because the speed with which they can eat stores on a brood nest is quite remarkable.
Okay,
A good
brilliant.
strong colony in the season will eat 5 pounds of a frame of stores quite easily in a week.
And just
That's
before we go to Penny, there's a couple of questions in the chat. One is from Paul Hind. Can you treat for varroa at the same time as introducing a newly mated queen?
Oh, I wouldn't. I wouldn't. Some people say they have. The reason I wouldn't is that when you introduce a new queen into a colony, you're totally dependent upon her pheromones going right through the colony and taking over the colony. And if you're treating for varroa, lots of varroa treatment have a smell about them, which will impact the atmosphere and the smell in the colony. So I would err on the side of caution and either introduce the queen and let her get established before treating, or wait till after. Hence, I said in the talk that September was a good time, because by September the treatments will have finished.
Yeah, I think that answers that question well. Take one more question from the chat and then I'll come to Penny. The next question in the chat is, somebody's got a 5-frame nuke. They're thinking about transferring it into a national brood hive. Is this the best thing to do, or should they just leave it in the nuke through the winter?
Right then. It depends what the 5-frame nuke is made out of. I've had very little success with overwintering wooden 5 or 6-frame nukes. It's as if the bees just cannot handle keep themselves warm enough in it. I've moved to polystyrene nukes. I don't like polystyrene hives, but I've moved to polystyrene nukes. And my nukes over the winter, the success rate has improved dramatically. And the speed with which the colonies build up in the springtime has improved. So I've got no problem about, if it's a 5-frame nuke and it's well populated, I would just leave it in the nuke for the winter, because remember, lots of those bees are summer bees which are going to die. So the number of bees you see now won't be the number of bees that go into the winter. There'll be a reduced portion of that, right? If you move it into a full-size colony, then you're just giving it a bigger space to essentially keep warm and look after. So I would err on the side of caution and just leave it in the 5-frame nuke.
Thank you. Penny, you've been waiting patiently.
Oh, well, it's a very quick, easy question, I hope. And then maybe
There's such a thing in beekeeping.
And then maybe a checking question. The mouse guard, where do we put that? Which is a really silly question, but I'm a first time, newbie with one hive. Where do we put it? By the board at the back?
Well, if you think about the entrance block I showed you in the smiley way,
yeah.
You cover the gap, you cover the hole, yeah, so the mouse can't get in through that smiley gap.
Right. Thank you.
Now,
Thank you.
other people who have hives which have got entrances underneath, I don't know the answer because I've never got any experience of them. But on a normal hive with the entrance block at the front, you put the mouse guard covering the entrance so bees can still fly in and out, but mice can't get in.
Perfect. That was it. And then it was that was it. And then it's a bit of a cheeky one because I know we're at the end of time, but it was going back to the very first question. I have a very full, thriving hive. I'm very lucky. Supers are full and just being capped. So I haven't yet extracted the honey from them. I just wanted to double check your meaning. If I clear the supers, which I'm planning to do this week, empty those out. If the hive looks like it's then still filling the super, I then do a brood and a half. Is that correct? For the winter.
Sorry, Penny, you broke up just at the critical time of your question. I didn't hear.
Always.
You're just extracting.
Yeah, extract this week. Put the super back on for them to clean up. If they still look like, because the hive feels very full and very, very busy, if they still look like they're really filling that super, put the super on the bottom for the winter, but only if it really looks like they're packing that out. Otherwise, just go to the brood box for winter.
Yeah, it's a judgment call.
Yeah.
If it's a very strong colony and they're really into the super, then put one of the wet supers underneath.
Fine.
And without the queen excluder, and let them do that.
I just wanted to double check. I was worried I hadn't understood. Sorry.
Yeah.
Got 4 people wanting to ask questions. I think when we get through those, we'll probably call the evening to an end. So first one, Jane Rankin, you've been waiting patiently. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah,
yes,
okay. So I'm a newbie as well to beekeeping, and I've got inherited a WBC hive, which is quite a nice one. And I have got a swarm that was collected by the association, and it's been progressing nicely in the hive. The brood box is probably about 3/4 full now. I put an Apiguard tray in there 10 days ago. I have been feeding the colony as was advised, just to kind of get them so that they were working at full pace, because obviously I didn't get the colony until June. So I wanted to kind of feed them and get them going. I've noticed since the Apiguard's gone in that they've stopped feeding. Is this normal? And there's a new Apiguard tray to go in at the weekend. So that's the second treatment. Should I try and feed them some more before September, or what? I don't really know what to do.
Okay, right. In my experience with the Apiguard and other things like Apivar, feeding when the treatment on is okay.
Yeah.
And I've been okay. What you have got to make sure of with Apiguard, because it's a tray.
Yeah.
You've got to make sure that the tray isn't underneath the feed hole, because you put the Apiguard on the top bars.
Yeah.
And then you have an eek, and then you have a crown board on top.
Yeah. I've done that. And then
so that in case any drips from the feeder, you don't want it filling the apigard tray.
Yeah.
So, and also, I think what I try to do is keep feeding on the bees stop taking it down. Yeah.
Say that again, Dave.
If I'm putting feeders on, if the bees want the feed and the space to put it, they will empty the feeder. Right. And if I then put a feed on and then I find out it's only been half emptied after a while, then that's telling me the bees have got nowhere else to put it. So I can take the feeder off, even though there's still half on, and then I can just reuse that elsewhere.
I think the bees have got room to put the feed on, though. I think, although it's not drawn comb yet, there's foundation there, but not drawn comb.
Well, keep feeding, because you need to get that drawn out.
Yeah.
And if it's a stronger colony, you've still got some time for them to draw it out, but they will need lots of feed to draw it out.
Yeah. So
you've got to keep feeding.
So I've took it off today because what's happening is it's getting a bit of mold in it. So I didn't like that. So I went and chucked it.
So what is it you're feeding?
Yeah, the feeder, the sugar syrup had gone.
Sugar syrup.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've chucked that away, but you'd suggest try a fresh lot and try just a little bit and put that back on.
Yeah, well, if they've got foundation there, you've got to try to encourage them to draw it out, and you're running out of time to do that.
Yeah.
So you need to keep feeding, and they need a significant amount of feed to draw out foundation.
Yeah.
And then once they've drawn out the foundation, they need feed to fill the foundation.
Yes. Yeah. It's just they're not taking it. I want them to have it. It's just since I've put that apigard on, they don't seem to want it.
And we'll just persevere with it.
Okay. All right. That's fine.
The bees seem to have they've spent 21 million years working out how to do this. So they'll work it out.
Bonnie, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question.
Hello. Actually, Jane got a lot of the points that I was going to ask. So we had 2 swarms move into my granddad's old WBC hives. And they built quite a bit of comb before we could do anything with them. So one set we shook off and placed some comb in the bottom and then a brood chamber on top, and then a feeder to try and encourage them to the top. And the second lot we just left on a board because it was quite a big hole and we didn't want to aggravate them too much, kind of thing. The second lot have built quite a bit into the brood chamber, but the first bees where we shook off, they haven't done too much. Is it best to take the brood frames away from them because they've built a lot of honeycomb in the bottom and then just put a feeder on top? Or
sorry, I don't know whether it's my I don't know whether it's my side or your side, but I keep losing you halfway through there. I'm just trying to change something. Can you still hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Sorry.
Technology is wonderful, isn't it, when it works?
Sorry.
Modern technology.
Sorry about that. People were kept breaking off at the critical things, so I wasn't able to follow the question.
Well, I'm not worried about my second set of hives because they seem to be quite strong, but my first lot, we tried to shake them off and put honeycomb in the bottom of the box with a brood chamber on top with a feeder on the top. And I looked in the other day and they built more comb off what we left in the bottom. They haven't gone into the brood chamber. Is it best?
What's at the bottom? Sorry, what's at the bottom, Bonnie?
It's a little bit of honeycomb that was left over from what they'd built because they'd built a massive amount in the. So what happened is they went into some WBC hives, which were just filled with old beekeepers.
Just essentially brace comb and stuff.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah, so it's not structured. Is there any brood in that?
I could see there was lots of grubs in there. So brood,
okay.
yep.
Okay. And do you know where the queen is?
Not 100% sure. So what's happened is they're at my grandparents, and my granddad's 84, an ex-beekeeper, and I'm trying to kind of
Well, I suspect that the queen is still in the bottom.
right.
In
Okay.
all, and the bees will just stay there until you get the queen out. Or the
Right.
queen goes up onto the new bits, and if the new bit hasn't got any drawn foundation to encourage her up, the queen won't leave the bottom.
Right. Okay.
So I suspect the queen is still in all the old brace comb they've drawn, and the bees
Yeah.
will just stay with her.
Okay.
You've
So
got some work to get the queen up,
yeah.
and it may be that what you do is you just leave it as it is for the winter,
Yeah, that's I thought I was going to do,
and
and
then
hope that they'll
deal with it in the spring.
spring. Yeah, but I didn't want to disturb them at this point, knowing that I could then jeopardize them in the winter time.
No, it may be that you leave them with a box of foundation on the top with some feed
Yeah.
for the time being.
Yeah.
And then leave them like that, but obviously you'll need to take the liquid feed off over the winter. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just see if they survive the winter like that, because you may do more damage getting them to where you want them to be, which isn't where the bees want to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And can I still treat them for the
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's fine. I did, because I was told when I bought the load of supplies not to treat them while they were trying to build the frames out, because they would slow them down from doing it. So I held off for a little while, but
No, you're running out of time. This is always a difficult time of year. We got the deadline is that the shortened days and the lower ambient temperature,
and
the bees slowing down for the winter. So we've got to do things quicker.
well,
So I would still treat, and I would leave them like that for the winter.
Yeah, brilliant.
And just
Thank you very
deal with
much.
it next year.
Yeah, get some professionals in, I think.
Yes, yes. There's two more people with their hands up. I'm going to come to them in a moment. I just want to check with Diane. There are some questions in the chat that we haven't touched. Can we capture those and answer them later?
Yeah, we'll do that, and we won't be able to send them back to people unless we've got an email. Don't post your email in the chat. We'll see if we can get them posted on social media with answers for you.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So, Donna, you've been waiting patiently. You'd like to unmute and ask your question?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Dave. My question is just about ventilation on the hives for the winter. I started off last year with one colony, and unfortunately they didn't get through the winter. I've got a WBC hive, and I left the tray in, and I think they didn't get enough ventilation. So really my question is, I was worried the bees were going to get cold basically and die, but I guess 21 million years on this planet, maybe I didn't need to do that. So yeah, that was my question, is how do you ventilate the hives, like specifically a WBC hive, but also the nuke boxes? Would you, obviously they've got the ventilation, I've got a nuke box as well. So I've got the ventilation at the bottom and the top. Would you just like put the roof on the top of the nuke box? So yeah, just ventilation questions, please.
Ventilation is one of those things. I think if generally in a nuke box, the only ventilation and the access the bees have is probably a hole that size as an entrance hole, and maybe a little mesh on the floor.
Yeah, mine's got a mesh on the floor and the mesh on the top.
Where's the top? The roof.
The roof.
Or the crown
yeah.
board.
It's got like it's like a panes one. So I'm sure it's got a mesh at the bottom and a mesh at the top. It has. Because
I've never seen one with a mesh on the top, because I would have thought that created a through draft, which the bees would not like at all. And generally,
if I could just interject, Dave, Paynes do a travelling roof for their polyneuts, which has got a mesh.
Oh, okay, I've got the travelling roof still on it then, so I need to take that off.
Well, you've got to take that off and have a proper roof on.
Okay, and that would be okay for the winter, just that one.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do that.
Because what would generally happen is that, given time, if there is too much ventilation, the bees will propolize it and stop it.
Okay.
But the travelling roof is there for ventilation, so they don't overheat when you're travelling on them. But you take that off and you put a solid roof on it, a flush roof. Yeah.
Okay.
Once in situ.
I need to do that.
Okay.
And
But
then
generally the bees will sort out ventilation themselves quite well.
okay, and then the WBC, because what I done, I ended up putting the varroa tray in, and to sort of like to try and keep the hive warm. But I think a lot of people sort of say to completely take the varroa tray out and only ever use that for the 2 weeks of like varroa treatment. Is that just leave that tray completely out? Stephen, you're nodding as well.
It should be that you just leave that out and you only put it in when you want to monitor varroa drop.
Okay. And okay,
So,
I was worried the bees were going to get cold basically and die, but
no.
They know better than we do, and they've learned along the line.
okay, brilliant. I will keep that tray out. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody.
Okay.
It's better out. Last question for the session is Sharon Grant, if you'd like to unmute, please.
Hi, thanks. I've got on one of my hives, I have a double brood. The queen is a prolific layer. I've had 2 supers filled. I've taken them off. The bottom brood is filled with eggs and larvae, and the top brood is half filled with eggs and larvae and honey. My question is, I think I've got 3 options. Do I leave well alone? Do I move her down into the bottom box, or do I move the top box to the bottom? I think for the winter,
right.
or do I just keep her as she is?
If it was my hive, I would just leave it as a double brood for the winter.
Okay.
She's established. She's in there. They've got it organized the way they want.
Yeah.
And then you do your manipulations in the springtime, because in the springtime, the bees will have moved to the top brood box, and that's where she'll start to lay. And quite often you find people who manage in double brood, that's the time when they take the bottom brood box away completely, because it'll probably be all dirty comb and it'll be empty, and they put a new brood box on the top with foundation on, almost like doing a Bailey frame change, but so they replace it, so they get the bees onto fresh wax on the top at the start of the season.
Okay. So just leave well alone.
Leave well alone. The reason being is
Yeah.
because if something goes wrong, we've got limited time to correct it before the winter.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is minimizing the risk for the winter, and then we got the start and the middle part of next season to fix things.
Okay. All right. That's perfect. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Those questions that were in the chat that we haven't addressed will
Can I put my hand up, please?
Yeah, of course.
Right. Okay. Sorry, Stephen. I just noticed in the chat a really important question.
Right.
And it's from Robert. Where is it? There seems to be a lot of conflicting advice on syrup versus fondant over the winter. Now, it's very easy. It's very easy. And if there are a lot of new beekeepers on the call this evening, we use syrup in the autumn, and the bees can handle that. Once the bees have been fed, we take the syrup off. We don't leave that on over the winter. The reason being, if they were to eat it, they don't have the ability to digest it properly, and it can give them diarrhea, right? And if they can't go on clearing flights with diarrhea, it makes a right mess in the hive. And then the next time we feed is if we're hefting, we then feed fondant. So once we finish feeding syrup and the bees are ready for the winter, we then feed fondant, which will probably be about January time. And we keep feeding fondant till probably the end of February, middle of March, depending upon where you are in the country and how well the bees can get out to forage. Because with fondant, they can eat it and get the sugar and use the water from the respiration to break it down without putting undue strain on their gut. Yeah. Whereas if they eat liquid, it ends up filling their gut and they end up with diarrhea. So I hope that clarifies that.
Yeah.
Sorry, Stephen, that's it.
Right. No, it's well interrupted. Thank you very much, Dave, for a fascinating talk. I've been making a few notes myself to get up to speed. One of the things that I've learned in 26 years is that you can keep learning. You get something new from every talk that you go to that will improve your beekeeping. As you were saying with the education system there, it's worth going to talks and lectures because you will learn something even if you've kept bees for a long period of time. Everybody's got a different approach. And if their bees are thriving, then that approach obviously works. I did have one question. Would you recommend a book for a beginner?
Book I would recommend for a beginner. Oh, well, I've got so many books. I think for a beginner, it would have to be one of two books. I think either the Haynes Manual, Beekeeping Manual, or Bees at the Bottom of the Garden by Campion, because if you read those and understand them, then they will take you through your first 18 months of beekeeping. While you do that, if you're a more advanced beekeeper and you want to learn more about what goes on in a hive, then I think Tom Seeley's, oh dear me, what's it called now? Honeybee Democracy is a fantastic read. You can read that from beginning to end. And the other book, which I think is a really good reference book, but isn't a book you can read, if you try to read it, it will send you to sleep, is, which one is it? Hooper, is it? Guide to Honeybees? Yeah, which is...
That book, Guide to the Honeybees, transformed my beekeeping early on. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great reference book. It's a great reference book, but as a beginner, I think the Haynes Manual or Bees at the Bottom of the Garden.
Can you put your hand down, Dave, please?
Oh, sorry. How do I do that? Lower hand.
And Marvin, the bee user, I'm going to let you speak, and then we'll close it off. If you can unmute yourself, Marvin, rather.
Yes. Good evening, Dave. My one question I find a little confusing for beginners. When feeding this time of year, I would myself personally, I would be using a light flying mix because I would want the bees to eat it to boost them up, because down here in Somerset, the nectar flow is almost finished. And then when they've drawn out and you've got plenty of good brood there of winter bees to take you through, I would then transfer to a heavier sugar mixture so that they store it, so that they've got a winter feed to draw on. Because there's in my book, there's two different types of feed, either a light flying mix or a heavy storing mix. If that makes sense to you.
I think, Marvin, I understand that completely, and I understand the logic, and that's the logic I've taught to people in the past. There's been some recent research, however, which says whether it's a light mix or a heavy mix doesn't make a blind bit of difference the way the bees use it. And I don't know whether there'll be more research on that coming out, but I understand exactly where you're coming from. A light mix so the bees can metabolize without needing to get water to turn it into brood, and then a heavy mix so they store it without having to evaporate the water as much. I understand the logic completely.
Yeah, that's my feeling and my thinking.
Yeah.
And I didn't want newbies to be confused by reading their manuals and books and getting the two mixed up together.
Yeah. Well, if the research is correct and says that it doesn't make a difference, that makes our life a lot less complicated.
Well, it's like the same old thing. You get one beekeeper, 3 questions and 15 answers.
Yeah.
But I myself am now into my 9th year where I haven't treated with a chemical treatment in any of my hives. Having had a very bad experience using a proprietary brand 9 years ago. And it took a big leap of faith to do it. And I lost over 50% of my hives my colonies on the first winter that I bred from the strongest, and literally the survival of the fittest. And I bred on, and I stopped bringing in stopped bringing in swarms.
I think that what you say may be true, but in looking at giving people advice, particularly newbies,
Oh, yeah.
and listening to Professor Steve Martin, who's the forefront of hygienic bees and the like, is carry on treating. And then as you get to know your bees and you get experience, then you make those kind of decisions. Carry on treating.
I'm an icing sugar fan. And I start preparing for winter really back in May.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much for a lovely evening and a very informative talk. It gives everybody a lot to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Marv. Thank you. And thank you once again, Dave. And I think that's it. We'll wind it up now. Have a good night, everybody. And we'll see you at the next talk.
Thank you very much. That was brilliant.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.